All right, let's do this. Mega solar flare. On September 1st, 1859, a British astronomer named Richard Carrington watched a white light flash across the surface of the sun. He didn't know what he was seeing. 17 hours later, the largest geomagnetic storm in recorded history hit Earth. Telegraph systems across Europe and North America caught fire. Operators received electric shocks through their equipment. The aurora borealis blazed over Cuba, over Hawaii, over the Caribbean. At midnight, people woke up thinking it was dawn. That event, the Carrington event, is considered the benchmark for solar catastrophe, but it wasn't the worst the sun has ever done to us. In 2012, physicist Fusa Miyake was studying tree rings in Japan when she found something that didn't belong. A sudden, massive spike in radiocarbon levels burned into the wood like a scar, dating to 774 AD. The same spike appeared in trees in Germany, in Siberia, in the American West, all in the same year, all marking the same event. The Miyake event of 774 AD was a solar particle bombardment 10 to 100 times stronger than the Carrington event. It left a permanent signature in ice cores pulled from Greenland and Antarctica. No civilization at that time had the ability to cross-reference those records. But the sun wrote the same message into every tree on the planet simultaneously. Scientists have now identified a second major spike at 993 AD. The pattern is clear. The sun does this regularly. We just haven't been watching long enough to know how bad it gets. Here is what makes this genuinely unsettling. Petroglyphs carved by ancient Puebloan cultures in the American Southwest depict plasma formations in the sky, shapes that only appear during extreme electromagnetic events, shapes that modern physicists can reproduce in laboratory conditions. The people carving those images weren't decorating the landscape. They were recording what they saw. They were leaving evidence. A direct hit from a Carrington-class storm today would disable global power grids. Recovery estimates range from 4 to 10 years. The Miyake event was larger. The sun has done this before. The only question is whether anyone will be paying attention when it decides to do it again. Mega tsunami. 8,150 years ago, a section of the Norwegian seabed the size of Iceland collapsed into the ocean. Not slowly, not over centuries. In under an hour, 290 cubic kilometers of sediment dropped into the deep water, and the ocean responded. The wave it produced crossed the entire North Atlantic. When it reached the coast of what is now Scotland, it arrived at a height of up to 25 meters. Coastal settlements that had existed for generations simply ceased to exist. The event is called the Storegga Slide, and geology has been finding its fingerprints ever since. Before the wave arrived, the world looked different. Britain was not yet an island. A low-lying landmass called Doggerland stretched across what is now the North Sea, connecting the British Isles to continental Europe. Mesolithic communities had lived there for thousands of years. They hunted, fished, built fires, raised children on land that sat at sea level. The Storegga Slide didn't just create a wave. According to researchers studying the period, it may have delivered the final blow that drowned Doggerland permanently, severing Britain from Europe and erasing an entire inhabited landscape beneath the water. Tsunami deposits from the Storegga event have been confirmed in Scotland, the Faroe Islands, and Greenland. The geological record is unambiguous. What makes it stranger is what survives above the waterline. Scottish, Norse, and Irish oral traditions contain flood myths tracing back to approximately this period. Stories of coastlines swallowed overnight, of communities erased by water without warning. Fishermen working the North Sea today still occasionally dredge up Mesolithic tools, worked timber, and animal bones from the seafloor. The drowned world is still down there. The Cumbre Vieja fault on the Canary Islands is considered an active risk by geologists. Modeling published in academic literature suggests that a major flank collapse there could send waves reaching the United States East Coast at heights of 20 to 25 meters. That is a modeled estimate, contested by some researchers. But the Storegga slide was not a model, it was a warning. A landmass the size of a small country disappeared underwater. The people standing on its shores had no warning, and the memory of it lasted 5,000 years. That should mean something. Supervolcano. On April 10th, 1815, a volcano on the island of Sumbawa in Indonesia erupted with a force equivalent to roughly 60,000 Hiroshima bombs. Mount Tambora killed 71,000 people immediately. Then it kept killing. The ash it threw into the stratosphere lowered global temperatures by nearly a full degree Celsius. Crops failed across 3 continents. 1816 became known across Europe and North America as the year without a summer. Frost came to New England in June. The worst famine of the 19th century followed. And Tambora wasn't even the big one. The Toba supervolcano erupted approximately 74,000 years ago on the island of Sumatra. Volcanologists classify it as a VEI 8 event, 100 times more powerful than Tambora. Ash from the eruption has been recovered in India, the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and the South China Sea. One eruption reached across every major region of the ancient human world. And the leading hypothesis about what it did to the human species is written into your DNA. Genetic research has identified a population bottleneck in the human lineage dating to approximately this period. Some scientists believe that after Toba, the entire global human population may have been reduced to between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals. That is a number small enough to fit in a sports stadium. Every language spoken today, every civilization built, every book written, every war fought, descended from whoever was left standing after a volcanic winter that may have lasted a decade. The Toba catastrophe theory remains contested, with some genetic studies questioning the direct connection. But the bottleneck itself is real. Something nearly ended us, and the timing aligns with the largest volcanic eruption in the last 2 million years. The 1816 summer that Tambora stole from Europe had one unexpected consequence. A young writer named Mary Shelley was trapped indoors at a villa on Lake Geneva with Lord Byron and a small group of friends, waiting out the endless cold and dark. Byron suggested a ghost story competition. What Shelley wrote became Frankenstein. The most famous monster in Western literature was born from a volcanic eruption. That is the thing about catastrophe. It creates things as well as destroys them. The Yellowstone caldera has erupted 3 times in the last 2.1 million years. The last time was 640,000 years ago. We are significantly overdue. Ice collapse. Around 1200 BC, within the space of roughly 50 years, almost every major civilization on Earth collapsed simultaneously. The Mycenaean Greeks vanished. The Hittite Empire, which had ruled Anatolia for centuries, disappeared almost overnight. The Kassite Babylonians fell. Egypt survived, but was permanently weakened. Ugarit, one of the most sophisticated trading cities of the ancient world, was burned and never rebuilt. The last known letter from Ugarit was found in the ruins, never sent, written to the king of Cyprus. It read, "The enemy's ships came here, my cities were burned, and they did terrible things in my country." Someone wrote that sentence. No one ever delivered it. Before the collapse, the Late Bronze Age was the most interconnected civilization network the world had ever seen. Palace economies in Greece, Anatolia, Egypt, and the Levant traded copper, tin, grain, textiles, and luxury goods across the entire eastern Mediterranean. It was a system built on specialization, which meant it was also a system built on fragility. Every node depended on every other node. When the chain broke, it broke everywhere at once. Paleoclimatological research has confirmed a severe drought beginning around 1200 BC across the eastern Mediterranean, linked to a shift in atmospheric circulation patterns. Migration followed the drought. the mysterious sea peoples depicted in Egyptian carvings at Medinet Habu as defeated invaders in feathered helmets may not have been conquerors at all. Some researchers now believe they were refugees, climate migrants from civilizations already destroyed by the same drought that was slowly strangling Egypt. They didn't invade to conquer. They moved because they had nowhere left to go. The collapse erased literacy in Greece for approximately 400 years. Linear B, the writing system of the Mycenaeans, disappeared from the record entirely. When writing returned, it was a different script, a different world, a different civilization built on the ruins of the one before. Climate scientists are currently monitoring the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the ocean current system that regulates European and North American weather. The data suggests it is weakening. The Bronze Age collapse was not one cause. It was a cascade where drought broke migration, migration broke trade, and broken trade broke everything else. That sequence has a name now. We call it systems collapse. We just haven't decided yet whether we're watching one. Mega earthquake. On January 26, 2001, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake struck the Gujarat region of India. It killed 20,000 people and left 600,000 homeless. Geologists measuring the aftershocks deployed sonar equipment in the Gulf of Combat and found something no one expected. Beneath 40 meters of water, the sonar returned the outlines of structures, walls, streets, a grid. The National Institute of Ocean Technology announced the discovery in 2002. The site stretched approximately 9 kilometers by 2 kilometers, larger than Mohenjo-Daro. Artifacts recovered from the area included worked lumber and pottery. A tooth retrieved from the sediment was reportedly carbon dated to approximately 9,500 years ago. That date remains disputed by independent archaeologists, but if confirmed, it would make this the oldest urban settlement ever found, predating Mesopotamia by 4,000 years. For most of recorded history, the official story of civilization's origins has been organized around Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, all arising within a relatively narrow window beginning around 5,000 years ago. The Kambat site complicates that story in ways that mainstream archaeology has been slow to absorb. An entire city, submerged not by war or abandonment, but by the same sea level rise that followed the end of the last ice age, sitting on the ocean floor and waiting. The Cascadia subduction zone runs along the Pacific coast of North America, from Northern California to British Columbia. It produces magnitude 9 or greater megathrust earthquakes approximately every 200 to 500 years. The last rupture occurred on January 26, 1700. The date is known precisely, not from any Western record, but from Japanese tsunami logs describing an orphan wave, a massive surge arriving from across the Pacific with no local source. The same date was preserved in the oral tradition of the Huayot people of Vancouver Island, who described a night of terror passed down through generations before geologists confirmed it. The oldest city we know about may be on the seafloor of the Gulf of Combat, waiting for someone to look carefully enough. The next major Cascadia rupture is not a question of probability. Geologists describe it as a certainty of timing, not occurrence. And the people who remembered the last one didn't write it down. They sang it. Global flood. Close your eyes and picture the end of the world. Not a war, not a plague. Water. A wall of water so high it swallows the mountains. A storm that drowns everything and leaves nothing but silence and a flat gray ocean. This is the oldest nightmare in human memory. More than 200 independent flood myths have been cataloged across cultures on every inhabited continent. The terrifying thing isn't that the story exists. It's that every single culture on Earth, no matter how isolated, no matter what language they spoke, tells the same story with the same details. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Sumerian approximately 2100 years BC, predates Genesis by at least 1,000 years, and contains nearly identical narrative details. A divine warning to one man. A boat. Animals taken aboard. Birds sent out to find land. The vessel coming to rest on a mountain peak. Centuries before the Hebrew Bible, before the Greek flood myths of Deucalion, a civilization in Mesopotamia was already writing down the same account. Historians have cataloged the parallels and generally concluded convergence, which is the academic word for coincidence. But there are too many of them, across too many oceans, for convergence to carry all the weight being asked of it. In 1997, geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman at Columbia University proposed the Black Sea flood hypothesis. Approximately 7,500 years ago, rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosphorus and flooded a freshwater lake basin. The resulting deluge covered an estimated 145,000 square kilometers of inhabited land. Neolithic farming communities around the Black Sea had built permanent settlements on its shores. In a matter of weeks, their world was gone. Ryan and Pittman proposed this was the origin of the Near Eastern flood narratives. Sea levels rose approximately 120 meters globally between 20,000 and 7,000 years ago, with multiple rapid pulse events along the way. In 2015, researchers Patrick Nunn and Nicholas Reed published a study matching 21 separate Aboriginal Australian flood narratives to specific datable geological sea level events. These oral traditions had preserved accurate geographic memory for up to 10,000 years. That is not mythology. That is a library built from memory and passed down through 100 generations without a single written word. If oral traditions can preserve accurate coastal geography for 10 millennia, the question isn't whether a catastrophic flood happened. The question is what else those traditions remember that we keep filing under myth. Lightning storm. In 774 AD, something happened to the sky above every continent simultaneously. A radiocarbon spike, now called the Miyake event, was burned into tree rings from Japan to Germany to the American West in a single year. The event was not a volcanic eruption. It was not a gamma ray burst. The leading scientific explanation is a solar particle event of extraordinary magnitude, somewhere between 10 and 100 times more powerful than the Carrington event. Powerful enough to ionize the upper atmosphere of the entire planet at once. No written record from that year describes what people saw looking up, but across the ancient world, carved into rock long before 774 AD, there is evidence that someone had seen it happen before. In 2003, plasma physicist Anthony Parrott of Los Alamos National Laboratory published a study in IEE Transactions on plasma science, cataloging petroglyphs from over 160 sites across 6 continents. The carvings depicted plasma column formations, the specific shapes that high-energy electromagnetic events produce in the upper atmosphere. These formations are invisible under normal conditions. They only appear when something extreme is happening to the magnetosphere. Parrott identified the same plasma instability pattern carved into rock in Canada, South Africa, New Zealand, Peru, and Norway, by cultures with no known contact and no shared language. What makes this evidence genuinely difficult to dismiss is the specificity. These aren't abstract spirals or general sky symbols. They depict plasma formations that modern physicists can reproduce in laboratory conditions. The only way to have drawn them accurately is to have watched them form. Ancient peoples on every continent witnessed an electromagnetic event so extreme it painted the sky with shapes that required scientific instruments to understand, and they carved those shapes into stone so they would survive. Every major culture on Earth has a deity who throws fire from the sky. Zeus and his thunderbolt, Thor and his hammer, the Hindu Indra with his Vajra, the Inca Ilapa. The mythological figure of a weapon hurled from the heavens that reshapes the world appears in cultures that had no contact with each other and no shared cosmological tradition. The ancient Greek word for world-ending fire from the sky was ekpyrosis. The Stoic philosophers who used it believed the cosmos periodically destroyed itself through celestial fire and was reborn. They may not have been inventing a philosophy. They may have been encoding a memory. Every culture carved what they saw in the sky, and what they saw was the same thing: asteroid impact. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, something exploded above the Tunguska River in Siberia, with a force equivalent to approximately 185 Hiroshima bombs. 2,000 square kilometers of forest were flattened in an instant. No crater, no fragments, just a shockwave moving outward from a single point in the sky. No one died because no one lived there. Shift the impact point 800 kilometers west and it hits Moscow. That was a small rock, a fragment, a warning the 20th century barely noticed. The one worth paying attention to happened 12,800 years ago, and we're only just beginning to understand what it did. In 2007, physicist Richard Firestone and colleagues published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, proposing the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. A layer rich in platinum and other impact markers had been found at 52 sites across North America, Europe, and the Middle East, all corresponding to approximately 12,800 years ago. The evidence suggested a fragmented comet or asteroid impacting the North American ice sheets at the opening of the Younger Dryas, a sudden 1,200-year return to glacial conditions. In 2018, geologist Kurt Kier and colleagues announced the discovery of a 31-kilometer wide crater beneath the Greenland ice sheet. Its age has not been definitively established, but it entered the conversation about the Younger Dryas event immediately. During the centuries surrounding 12,800 years ago, the Clovis culture, North America's first confirmed civilization, disappeared from the archaeological record. 35 genera of large mammals went extinct across the continent. The Natufian culture of the Levant, the first known proto-agricultural society, had been building permanent settlements, approaching what we would recognize as civilization, and then reverted entirely to nomadic life for 12 centuries before agriculture resumed. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest written documents on Earth, notes that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for impossibly long periods. After the flood, lifespans and reigns collapsed to human scale. Some researchers read this not as mythology, but as a before and after record of the same boundary event the Younger Dryas represents. If the first civilization was erased by an object falling from the sky, and the survivors encoded that memory into every story about fire raining down from heaven, the question isn't whether it can happen again. The question is whether this time we would see it coming. Magnetic pole reversal. Right now, beneath your feet, the Earth's magnetic field is weakening. Not slowly, not imperceptibly. It is weakening at a rate 10 times faster than scientists expected when they first began measuring it. The South Atlantic anomaly, a region stretching over South America, and the South Atlantic where the field has already dropped to dangerous levels, is expanding. Satellite operators route spacecraft around it to avoid radiation damage. Airline crews flying through it accumulate elevated radiation exposure. And this is not a future risk. It is a present condition. The last time the field dropped this far was approximately 41,000 years ago. That period is called the Lachance excursion, and what happened during it should be in every conversation about existential risk that we're currently not having. For most of the 41,000-year-old event's duration, the Earth's magnetic field dropped to approximately 5% of its current strength. A study published in Science in 2020, led by Andreas Nilsson and colleagues, confirmed that the weakening was severe and extended across roughly 2,000 years. The magnetic field is the planet's primary shield against solar wind and cosmic radiation. Remove it, and the ozone layer loses its protection. Surface radiation increases dramatically. The paper noted that the timing of the Lachance excursion overlapped with the disappearance of Neanderthal populations in Europe from the archaeological record. That is the implication worth sitting with. The Neanderthals survived 300,000 years of ice ages. They made tools, buried their dead, and demonstrated symbolic behavior. They were not fragile. What ended them may not have been competition with modern humans. It may have been 2,000 years of elevated cosmic radiation, quietly degrading their immune systems, their food chains, the genetic viability of their small populations. A weakened magnetic field is invisible. It doesn't announce itself. It just slowly makes everything harder to survive. The magnetic North Pole is currently moving from northern Canada toward Siberia at approximately 55 kilometers per year, a rate that has accelerated dramatically since the 1990s. A full geomagnetic reversal, when north and south magnetic poles completely swap, occurs on average every 450,000 years. The last full reversal was approximately 780,000 years ago, which means we are overdue. Every satellite, every power grid, every navigation system, every communication network on Earth depends on a shield that the planet can withdraw without warning and without our consent. The last time it weakened this way, a species that had survived everything else disappeared. The Great Silence. There is a date that keeps appearing in the work of archaeologists, geologists, astrophysicists, and mythologists who have never spoken to each other, who work in different fields, study different evidence, and use different methods. They keep arriving at the same moment. Approximately 12,000 years ago, something ended. Not a species, not a culture, not a city, something larger. The evidence is in the ice cores, in the seafloor sediments, in the radiocarbon spikes in tree rings, in the flood myths on 6 continents, in the extinction record, in the sudden global appearance of megalithic monuments oriented to the sky. 12,000 years ago, a chapter closed. And what we call human civilization, every empire, every invention, every monument, may be the footnote written by the survivors. Göbekli Tepe sits in the hills of southeastern Turkey. It was built approximately 11,500 years ago by hunter-gatherers, people who, according to every assumption our timeline of history makes, should not have been capable of building it. It is the oldest monumental architecture on Earth. It predates the wheel. It predates agriculture. It predates every civilization we have ever named. And someone built it anyway, with precision, with purpose, with astronomical alignments carved into pillars that weigh up to 20 tons. Excavations led by Klaus Schmidt, beginning in 1996, confirmed that the site was not abandoned. It was deliberately buried. Every chamber carefully filled with sand and rubble, approximately 8,000 years ago, for reasons that remain completely unknown. Plato, writing in the Timaeus and Critias, described the destruction of a sophisticated island civilization 9,000 years before the time of the Athenian statesman Solon. That arithmetic places the event at approximately 11,500 years ago. Plato stated his source was Egyptian priests at the Temple of Sais, who kept records of events that occurred before Greek civilization existed. Geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University has published peer-reviewed evidence that the Sphinx enclosure shows water erosion consistent with heavy rainfall, suggesting the monument is significantly older than the civilization credited with building it. The Sumerians, the Egyptians, the Mayans, and the Vedic Indians all describe an age before the current one. A golden age, followed by catastrophe, followed by a slow rebuilding from almost nothing. Every catastrophe on this list may be a piece of the same event. A fragmented impact on the North American ice sheets would produce meltwater pulses, causing global flooding. Atmospheric debris would trigger volcanic winters. Shock waves would generate earthquakes and submarine landslides. The survivors of that event had every reason to build monuments aligned to the sky, to encode warnings in myths about fire and water, to carve what they had witnessed into stone. because they understood, at the level of lived experience, that it could happen again. Göbekli Tepe was buried with extraordinary care, not destroyed, preserved, as if someone was hiding it for a future civilization that hadn't been born yet, leaving a message in the only material that survives everything. We found it in 1994. We are still learning to read it. 10 catastrophes, 10 warnings. The solar flare that can burn every circuit on the planet. The wave that drowned a continent in a morning. The volcano that nearly ended the human species and left the scar in your DNA. The cascade collapse that erased the most sophisticated civilization network of the ancient world in 50 years. The earthquake that may have buried the oldest city ever built beneath 40 meters of water. The flood that every culture on Earth remembered and encoded in stone and song. The electromagnetic storm that ancient people carved into rock on 6 continents. The asteroid that may have reset the clock on civilization's first attempt. The invisible shield that is weakening right now, today, and that no one is treating as the emergency it may be. And beneath all of them, the great silence of 12,000 years ago. The event that every tradition remembers, and no single discipline has been willing to fully claim. What these 10 items share is not a cause. They share a logic. The universe does not hold the current arrangement of our civilization in particular esteem. It has ended versions of this before. The people who survived the last time understood that, which is why they built monuments, carved warnings, and told their children the same story until the children's children forgot why it mattered. We found the monuments. We cataloged the myths. We dated the sediments. And then, in nearly every case, we filed the findings under coincidence and moved on. Hit subscribe if you're not done asking why. Leave a comment with the one item you think we're closest to repeating right now. Make your case. The floor is yours. The evidence was always there. Carved in stone, written in ice, encoded in the rings of trees that outlasted every civilization that ever stood beneath them. The only thing that keeps changing is whether anyone is listening.